We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real.
Suburban women helped determine the 2020 election, but there's more to us than the headlines would have you believe.
The suburbs aren't a homogenous sea of white people in perfect houses. Real change is happening in the suburbs, and we have things to say.
When women share their personal stories, walls come down and barriers are broken.
Welcome to the Suburban Women Problem, a podcast from Red, Wine, and Blue. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Amanda Weinstein.
I'm Rachel Vindman.
I'm Jasmine Clark.
And this is the Suburban Women Problem. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we're going to talk about voting rights and why some people are trying to make it harder for you to vote. We'll be speaking with Mari Yepez, who grew up in Arizona and has been dealing with voter suppression efforts firsthand. After that, I get the chance to interview Ufot, the CEO of the New Georgia Project, the organization started by Stacey Abrams to defend voting rights in Georgia. She is a true treat, so please stick around for that. But first, let's talk about the CDC just suddenly kind of reversing its mask mandate and guidance for vaccinated Americans. So how do you guys feel about this? Are you guys ready to see the naked faces out there?
No, I am totally not ready for the unmasking. And to be honest, it's not that I'm not ready. I think everyone is kind of in a place of like, oh, I want to wear masks forever, or oh my gosh, get this thing off of my face. So I completely understand, that position that people are in where they're just like, I'm just ready for this to be over. However, I'm very concerned because almost immediately we just started having mobs of people like show up to school board meetings and all this stuff, basically saying, remove the mask and take the mask off. And the CDC said so. And I'm like, that's not what they said. And so, yeah, I'm kind of in a weird place. It's like bittersweet. Like I'm happy to take my mask off, but I'm still a little concerned about being around other people that don't have a mask on, especially if my children are with me because they're not vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed really sudden and there wasn't a lot of context to it. Like they're saying this for vaccinated people, but the reality is, how do we know who's vaccinated and who isn't?
And weren't the people who don't want to get vaccinated the people who never wanted to wear masks in the first place?
Yeah, you make a very good point about the Venn diagram of people who don't want to get vaccinated and the Venn diagram of people who don't want to wear masks being a beautiful, perfect circle. And so we're just in this place where everyone is just like, you're just going to have to trust that all these people are doing the right thing. And I'm like, I don't know if y'all have been in the same place I've been for the last year, but that is probably the last thing that I will trust for a long time, is that people will just do the right thing. And while I know a lot of people say, well, you have to trust the science, I trust the science all day. It's the people I don't trust. I don't trust that people will do the right thing in these situations. And I worry that that's going to lead to spikes and local epidemics and things like that as people kind of get a little cavalier.
How is that going to work with, some of these places like Texas and Iowa that have passed laws that there cannot be mask mandates? So there are laws against mask mandates.
And you're taking this decision away from health professionals, and you're making that decision for health professionals. You're also making that decision for business owners. If business owners think that they can operate best still by having a mask mandate, for example, a grocery store might feel that way, then you're taking that decision out of the business owners. And even with this new CDC thing, this is putting a lot of this on the backs of those business owners that maybe shouldn't be on the backs of those business owners. So it's now their responsibility to decide, should people inside our grocery store still be wearing masks or not? I mean, that's one of the places where a lot of moms have to go. It's not, this like, oh, it's not a restaurant, it's not a bar, it's a grocery store. And do we feel comfortable being in a grocery store where everyone is unmasked if we have a brand new baby with us? And I think the answer for a lot of moms might be, I'm not so comfortable with that.
Yeah. Are you guys vaccinated?
I am. Woo, woo.
Yes, I am vaccinated. I got vaccinated as soon as my group, like when it opened up. I probably got vaccinated like 3 days later. And I have my two babies. They are much taller than me, but they are still my babies. And they are 12 and 14, almost 15. and they are both half vaccinated.
Ooh, so you're starting to feel a little relief, maybe, just a little bit.
A little. I'm feeling a little relief, but I'm also feeling a little trepidation because the world has just like opened up. And so now I feel like I need to pull them back in until they get that second dose and they go through their 2-week incubation period is what I call it. You know, to your point, Amanda, about businesses, one of the things that I worry about is as people are still grappling with the fact that there's still a significant portion of people that aren't vaccinated.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to retreat back into their homes. They are going to start making decisions about which businesses to go to. The business that still requires masks, I'm a little more comfortable with going to. The business that has just, thrown all caution to the wind, less comfortable. And therefore, will that have an impact on our economy?
I mean, so that's a good point. So when we first saw the pandemic hit, what you saw with consumer spending is consumer spending went down before we shut down, which means we were afraid. If we are afraid to go in restaurants and grocery stores, that means we, and by we, I mostly mean women because we make most of the decisions in our household. If we are afraid to go out and spend our money, you aren't getting our money. So you have to make us feel comfortable. Businesses have to make people, especially women, especially moms, feel comfortable or they will lose business.
So to that end, speaking of going out and doing stuff, at the end of the summer, we'll be traveling with Alex for his book tour events, which are going to start being a little bit more in person, which is totally terrifying to me that we're going to be going to bookstores and he's going to be talking to people, and it's all scary. I will totally acknowledge that it's scary. Are your children doing anything this summer? Are you going traveling or?
I'm still nervous. So I haven't made any, big family vacation plans at all. And part of it is I have younger kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you ask me like, hey, how would you like to spend 2 hours on a plane with a 3 and 4-year-old? No, thanks. I don't like spending an hour with them in a restaurant. So I'm not going to go be doing those things. And part of it's like a benefit cost thing, right? The benefit of having small children on an airplane and the benefit of having small children in a restaurant isn't that great. And there's still a risk and they're unvaccinated and they're going to be kind of much lower on the list. But I'm more comfortable going to parks and we meet friends at parks and outside stuff I feel super comfortable with. So we are outside as much as we can. Playing, doing whatever we can outside.
Yeah, I will just say for me, we are traveling, but I think I'm in a bit of a different position from you all in that my children are vaccinated. And so we're hitting the road. We are going to do a mixture of car trips and plane trips. And, we're trusting the science. I do appreciate that the CDC guidelines still require you to wear a mask on planes, trains, buses, and public transport, even if you're vaccinated. I think that's important. So, I wish all y'all well on y'all's travels, whether it be to the park or, or further. But yes, we are definitely going to have to go to someone's beach. I feel like I need the beach at least once every 3 months to feel normal.
We're going to substitute it with our Lake Erie beach. Still a beach.
Oh, well, that counts.
I think so. All right, so let's start talking about voter rights. There are laws that make it harder for people to vote, and they're cropping up all over the country, some places more than others. And we know there's a lot of misinformation out there, and some of it can seem reasonable, actually. Of course, we want people to be confident in our elections, and we want people to be confident in the results of our elections, and we want our elections to be secure, right? So let's unpack this a little bit. Jasmine, I know you have a lot of experience in this area. You've literally seen an example of these bills come across your desk. What can you tell us about the Georgia voter suppression effort?
So the first thing I can tell you is that regardless of what anyone else will tell you, it is not about election security. The truth is, if the results of the election in Georgia had been different, these bills would not exist. And so, Georgia turning blue, which I hesitate to use the word turning because I believe it was already a little blue. We just didn't know it yet. So Georgia revealing its blueness.
It came out.
Yes. it scared the crap out of the other side. If I'm not, not to mince words, literally it scared the crap out of them. And they went into panic mode and they're like, what can we do to stop this? And so what they did was, with a fine-tooth comb at a microscopic level, looked at all the different ways that the people who didn't vote for them voted. And they said, we're going to do a little bit of this. We're going to snip here. We're going to cut there. We're going to trim here. The level of detail, and 98 pages of detail, might I add, that went into trying to change the outcome of future elections in Georgia is astonishing. It's horrifying, actually. So they reduced the amount of time people have to apply for an absentee ballot. They reduced the amount of time election workers had to send absentee ballots, and then they reduce the amount and the availability of ballot drop boxes to turn those ballots in. And of course, this is going to disproportionately affect areas that have larger amounts of voters, which just so happen to be areas where people of color reside, and also just so happen to be areas where people vote blue. They didn't even really try to hide it, if I'm being honest. One guy went to the well and basically said, too many people voted and it overwhelmed the system. That is actually on record. That is what they said was a reason why we needed this bill. Too many people voted.
If you look at our country versus others, I'm sorry, too few people vote. We have very low voter turnout compared to Germany and many other countries around the world.
Agree.
That's ridiculous. And I'll say, some of the voting laws that I've seen have not felt unnecessary when I first saw them. So to be honest, the voter ID laws, when I first saw those, I told people I personally am fine with the voter ID laws. I have an ID. I'm fine showing people that ID. And if this builds confidence in our elections, why not just require an ID? Now, there are some I don't agree with. First of all, I don't think I should have to register for the right to vote. I don't have to register for the right to free speech. I don't have to register for the right for freedom of religion. Why do I have to register for my right to vote? So I don't agree with that. But I did agree with the voter ID laws until I actually went and voted, and I voted in a retirement home, and I saw someone turned away from the polls, which I had never seen before. And it was an elderly white woman who was a resident of this retirement home who did not have an ID because she hadn't driven in years. And and I have this memory now because something changed in my brain where I was like, of course she doesn't have an ID. She hasn't driven in years. Why would she have an ID? And I remember the staff there were very kind, and they took her, helped her back to her room where they said, well, we can get you a utility bill, and a utility bill will be good enough, and let me help you get it. And I remember as I watched them take her back to her room, I said, not every elderly person in America has the staff available, right? Not everyone has someone who knows what the voter laws like the staff did at this place. And right there, I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I get why requiring an ID and a picture ID is super not fair to a lot of populations.
You both said it. We need more people to vote, not less. And it's a tragedy for anyone to say that. And even this week, there was a video that came out of a strategist talking about, if we do this, then we win. And this they're talking about is preventing people from voting. That is their only strategy. It's math. They are not winning new voters. The only hope they have is to restrict the voting population. It's worked for them for a very, very long time. And I know, Jasmine, you have, a lot of experience with that.
I grew up watching my parents stand in line to vote. Every single time I have voted, except for the last elections, I have stood in a long line. In fact, I thought that was normal. I did not even realize there were places where there were not lines.
It's just ridiculous that people would have to stand in line for hours.
I have never had to wait longer than, I don't even want to say it. I don't think I've ever had to wait longer than 4 minutes, to be honest. And I think 4 might be an overestimate. Ever.
No, me either.
Never waited longer than 4 minutes.
I did not know that was a thing when I started running for office, and I'm going and I'm checking the different precincts, and the way I do it, I don't go in, but I do, I send someone in to check the numbers to see how many people have voted that day. And the difference between the precincts that vote heavily Democratic versus the precincts that vote in the other direction was so stark. And that was the first time I was like, wow, why does this precinct have 20 machines and a 5-minute wait time? And this precinct have 7 machines and a 3-hour wait time. And this precinct actually has more registered voters than the precinct with the 20 machines. That doesn't logically make sense. And how are we doing this math? But when it comes to voter ID laws, when it comes to removing drop boxes, and a lot of times, like you said, it might seem innocuous on its face. The truth of the matter is an overwhelming majority of people have some form of photo ID. But there is still a significant portion of people, and I say significant because it's significant enough to change the outcome of an election. There's a significant number of people that do not have a photo ID and have significant barriers to getting a photo ID. What are those barriers? You know, the DMV in their area is literally open from like 11 to 3 on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And that just happens to be when they work. And so they physically cannot go to the DMV and get a photo ID. Then you've got people who are homebound. You have people with certain disabilities. They're not going to be driving, so they don't feel like they need a driver's license. There's so many things. And so people say, well, the state gives out a free photo ID. It still requires you to go to a place. And all of these things, again, create barriers. And when I was growing up, we didn't have to have a photo ID. The story you told about the elderly lady in that nursing home, Amanda, that story still would have ended badly here in Georgia because that utility bill would not have been an acceptable form of ID for her to vote. There are different voter ID laws across the country, and Georgia has some of the most restrictive. And that brings me to the point about Jim Crow laws. I think it's important for people to know that Jim Crow laws did not mention Black people. The law did not say Black people cannot vote. They weren't allowed to do that. They had to be a little bit more insidious about it. And so what they did was they created laws that could be used against certain groups of people. They had grandfather clauses that said if you voted before, you can vote and you don't have to do all these different things, knowing that Black people had just gotten their right to vote. So they hadn't voted before. So there's that. And then they create this list of impossible things like how many jelly beans are in the jar, knowing that, you know, most people can't just answer that question. And then they say, oh, you got the test wrong, you can't vote. That's just some examples. So they never actually said, we're making laws so Black people can't vote. They just made laws and used those laws to target Black people. And that's the exact same thing we're seeing right now, which is why a lot of people refer to these voter suppression laws as Jim Crow 2.0, because it's what it feels like. It's insidious. It's not obvious. And there's so many ways for them to stand in front of you with a smile on their face and say, we're not targeting anybody. This is just, you know, a law to make voting more secure. That's what they thought they were doing back then when they made those Jim Crow laws too. It's the same rationale. It's almost like history repeating itself.
If we had a better knowledge of history. So let's bring in someone else who has been dealing with this issue firsthand. Mari Yepez, welcome to the podcast. So Mari immigrated to the United States at the age of 5 with her family, grew up in a conservative town in Arizona. At the age of 19, she joined her first political campaign to unseat Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who had been, doing a lot of things, but terrorizing the immigrant community in Arizona. So welcome, Mari. Thank you for being with us. So tell us a little bit about what have you been doing?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me today. I've been, really since I was 19, really engaged in doing a lot of voter registration, turning people out to vote, in particular people of color, young people. I really got involved just because of my experience growing up. I faced a lot of discrimination. Arpaio was this terrorizer, in the immigrant community. And it didn't matter, I was a resident at the time, but that didn't matter. It was the color of your skin that you were defined by. And that's really why I got involved. Also, SB 1070, which was a state that, a law that was passed and really to target just immigrant community.
So a lot of the political science research says that voting is very habitual. You're kind of either in the habit of doing it or you're not, and it can be very hard to create a new habit. So what are your strategies to get people to kind of create this new habit and then actually make it stick?
Yeah, I think it's just been something we've been working on for years. It's just continuing the same conversation. It's also getting the community involved. So, it's not just like the parents, but from the same neighborhoods that we walk, we recruit their kids to be volunteers, right? I've done a lot of volunteer recruitment from high schools and get young students involved and really making them feel like, that they have a voice and that there's something you can do even if you're like not 18 or ineligible to vote yet. Also with undocumented, students that have DACA, it's like they can't vote, but they're like the best people to get other people to vote. And also just understanding it's like people are doing the, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs to survive. Like voting is not at the forefront of their mind. And so, we don't just do work right before the election or on election years. It's like we talk to this community year long.
Wow. What made you at 19 be like, this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, I got an email through Arizona State University saying, they were looking for organizers. I didn't really know what it was. I was going into the big city. I grew up in a small town. But, growing up, my mom just said, like, put your head down, focus. Like in school, which I did. I mean, I graduated ASU when I was 20 and I, really took college courses when I was in high school. But that wasn't enough. Like, me just putting like my head down and doing what I needed to do, I still faced discrimination. I still felt like, racism. And so that's when I really decided like, no, I have a voice. Like I have to do something. I can't just like ignore it. I'm just going to be a law student. I wanted to be an immigration lawyer, but decided to stick with the organizing.
I love this conversation because it reminds me of actually how I got into politics. I just love hearing this story about how you like saw something that needed to change and you were like, what can I do? And then you jumped in and you did it. And again, at 19, I don't know what Amanda and Rachel were doing when they were 19, but when I was 19, I definitely, I was in my second year of college and I was doing second year of college things. And so I admire you. Like I am inspired by you. I hope that my children have examples and see things like this and realize you don't have to be a certain age or a certain status or, know certain people in order to be a change maker.
Mari, we want to thank you for being here with us today and thank you for the work that you are doing. It was really amazing to talk with you and to hear the things that you can do by engaging your community, reaching out to your community, empowering your community. And we thank you for telling your story with us.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
And coming up after the break is my interview with Ufot. All right. Today we have with us Ufot. She is the CEO of the New Georgia Project, a voter support and legal action nonprofit founded by Stacey Abrams. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I heard Stacey Abrams kind of courted you for this job at the New Georgia Project. So what did she say to convince you to finally take it?
Yeah, so Stacey, and I want to make sure that I take a moment to shout out a very good friend of mine, of ours, Lauren Growargo, who worked as Stacey's campaign manager and currently is the CEO of Fair Fight Action. And, we began our friendship as sort of young professionals in Ohio and sort of Democratic Party politics. I was living and working in Canada, and Lauren said, are you coming home for the holidays? Is what she said. And I was like, have you met my mom? Of course I'm coming home for the holidays. That's really not an option.
Not optional.
Not an option at all. She's like, well, I want you to meet this state representative. Her name is Stacey Abrams. And I was like, I I'm coming home to be with my friends, not meeting some state rep. And then it's like, well, you should just meet for brunch. And then, I was back on board because obviously brunch.
Oh, yeah. Few mimosas. Yep.
Yes, exactly. But honestly, it was the clarity that it wasn't some Pollyanna-ish sort of future Georgia that was divorced from the reality of our current politics, that she had an analysis about the demographic shifts that were happening in the country, and that she had a clear-eyed and sober analysis of the gaps in the voter registration ecosystem and like the progressive political ecosystem, that she knew that there were young people like me from Georgia who had progressive values and didn't feel like there were opportunities to do the kind of organizing work that I had done across the world at home. And that, so knowing that it would require us to build out the ecosystem, the infrastructure that allowed us to take in activists and organizers and professional communicators and professional fundraisers from across different industries and bring them into the progressive community political organizing world. And so it was something big and scary that we know our families need and deserve. And she had a plan on how to make it real. And I generally am suspicious of people who want to run for office, people who put themselves out there like that. Like, why would you voluntarily do that?
It's not rational.
It's not rational. Who does that? Like, you don't like your privacy? But again, definitely, like, from the first time we met, it was clear that she wasn't driven by ego, but by a sense of duty to, again, Georgia families, and sort of building on the informal infrastructure that already existed, right? There's tons of reproductive justice organizing and civil rights organizing that just ordinary people were doing as their weekend and sort of after work activities. And like, how do we take and harness that energy and channel it and funnel it into something that will allow us to win? And so that's what, we are. We're like movement Bob the Builders. And a lot of that comes from the sort of energy and the brainchild of our founder, the one and only Stacey Abrams.
Your job seems very people-oriented. You're an activist, you're an organizer, you deal with voter support, voter registration, and we're in a pandemic. How have you dealt with your job in a pandemic and also recovering from the pandemic?
Yes, it has been a challenge. But what I say to our staff and our volunteers is that, our overarching sort of commitment is to building people power. And so while we tend to, have a reputation for hosting these awesome in-person events, that our aim is to connect people with each other as they work to build the new Georgia, build the new South, build the country and the communities that our families deserve. And so what that meant was, instead of going to every dorm move in and move out day to register people to vote, we launched events like Twitch to Vote, which is Twitch is this streaming platform that's preferred by gamers. Think about like YouTube for people who are into games. And, hosted a Twitch to Vote activation on National Voter Registration Day where we helped 9,000 people register to vote in one day. And then we did Twitch to Vote and we ran that back on Election Day in November and had over 500,000 unique viewers on our live stream where we brought in DJs and Beyonce's mom to talk to young people about the power of their vote and about Southerners and progressive politics in the Deep South. And so, yeah, I think that the idea was that we wanted to connect with our people, to talk about issues that matter with folks and again, connect the power of their vote to the change that they've told us that they want to see. And so if we can't do it in person, we figure out how to do it virtually.
You worked for unions, you worked on workers' rights, you worked on teachers' rights. How has it been pivoting from, workers' rights to voters' rights?
I think that they're all related to me in my mind. The idea that people that are closest to an issue, or the way that it's said is, people who are closest to the pain should be at the heart of developing solutions. And so I think that, from immigrant rights organizing, labor organizing, organizing around higher ed, that all of these are conversations about power, the power to stop bad things from happening and the power to sort of build the communities that we want to live in, and making sure that people get tapped into that power, that they understand it, and that they understand how to wield it. And yeah, that feels like the thread, like moving people to action in service of a shared vision, a shared mission.
Wow, that is so important to empower people as voters, as workers, giving people who maybe feel powerless, giving them and showing them the power that they do have. So you mentioned earlier, talked a little bit about some demographic shifts going on, and I know that you've described kind of this reverse migration going on in Georgia. Can you explain, what that means and why that's so important?
Yeah, it's actually a big deal. A lot has been written about the browning of America, if you will. And nowhere do we see those demographic shifts happening more acutely than we do like across the South and Southwest. And Georgia is an interesting case in this because what's contributing to Georgia's demographic shifts is also what political scientists and demographers are referring to as the reversal of the Great Migration. So the Great Migration between the 1920s and the 1970s, Black Americans fled the Deep South to go to the...
Came up here to Cleveland.
Yep. Absolutely, 100%. And also to the coast, right? Fleeing racialized violence, lynchings and such, but also in search of economic opportunities, which is why there are tons of Black folks, right, in Chicago and Cleveland who can trace their roots to Mississippi, right? Black folks in New York and New Jersey who trace their roots to the Carolinas and Georgia, et cetera. And now those folks are moving back, or their children are moving back. Right. And so I like to joke and be like, don't come to Atlanta, we're full. I hear Charlotte is lovely this time of year. But the truth of the matter is that this massive, very, very rapid and unique demographic shift is what is contributing to the change in Georgia politics. And so it's why we are where we are now. I would also say that that's also why we see such an aggressive and well-funded and coordinated pushback against the work of the New Georgia Project because of the work that we're doing to leverage the civic power of Black and brown Georgians. And so, yeah, that, defying conventional wisdom that Georgia's a red state and it's just what it is, defying conventional wisdom that says that Black people don't vote, that Latinos are not citizens, that Asian Americans are secret Republicans, that white women lie to pollsters because eventually they're going to vote the way their husbands and fathers do, that we work to defy those conventions because we know that that doesn't tell the entire story. And so, yeah, we are in this unique place. We also don't believe that demographics automatically equal destiny, right? And so the demographic shifts are an opportunity to organize with a broad multiracial coalition of progressive activists and voters. Like all of those things, plus the demographic shifts, are what have created the opportunity in this moment.
So you mentioned the pushback that you have gotten in Georgia. I want to talk more about that pushback. So just to give a little background. So in 2013, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court struck down portions of the Voting Rights Act that required Southern states that had Jim Crow era, voter suppression laws, required them to go to the DOJ to kind of check with them before they passed these voting rights laws. So what has that meant specifically for Southern states and for Georgia and what you've been facing down in Georgia?
Yeah, what it has meant for us is that, I want to be clear, and I used to be worried about stating it this clearly because I would be afraid that people would accuse me of being hyperbolic, but the Shelby versus Holder Supreme Court decision literally kicked the teeth out of the Voting Rights Act. That the idea that states that had, or jurisdictions that had a history of voter suppression and making it more difficult for people, no longer had any sort of oversight, that they could change voting laws as they saw fit. And they definitely took that opportunity and ran with it. And so, it's not lost on me that the 2016 presidential elections was the first presidential election where American voters went to vote without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. And we got the results that we got as a result of that.
Wow. I've never made that connection.
Right. And so this all seems like an attempt to interfere with our elections, to shrink the electorate, to purge the voter rolls, to limit the participation of this sort of growing and newly activated majority of Americans.
Wow. All right. Before we go, we want to ask you some rapid fire fun questions. All right. And say, are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's do this. All right. Your favorite binge watch of the past year?
Ooh, my favorite binge watch of the past year. Don't laugh at me, y'all. Frasier. I'm really getting into Frasier. I think I was a little too young to appreciate the humor when it was on television. But going back, I'm here for super smart, funny comedy and sort of like the class dynamics that are there, and the Pacific Northwest and just how different it is from the South. Yeah, that's been my. Like, oh, this was actually a really good show.
All right. Did you pick up any weird or interesting habits or hobbies during the pandemic?
Well, I got 2 dogs who've been wonderful companions in the middle of the pandemic. But my brother and I also tried our hand at woodworking. And so we built a customized bookshelf for myself where we bought the lumber and shaved it down and, painted it, sanded it, put it all together. I love my bookshelf.
All right. It's Saturday night. What are you drinking?
Recently, I have been really disciplined about water and water with lemon and trying to get my hydration up so that, I have goals. But normally, I'm a whiskey girl. I'm a whiskey and a bourbon girl. And so I was gifted a bottle of Uncle Nearest, 1884, for the work that we did in the Georgia elections in 2021.
So what's your favorite thing about Atlanta that no one talks about?
I think food culture, international food culture, from Buford Highway to a lot of the suburban cities on the southern crescent of the city, the northern and the southern crescent of the city, that it feels like an international food court, that you can get high quality cuisine from every corner of the globe here in Atlanta. And that's something that I absolutely love and not enough people talk about enough about.
Oh yeah, I love any type of international food. I'm super into that. All right, what's the funniest thing that happened to you while on a Zoom call? Any cat filters?
No cat filters, but I don't know if this is funny, but it definitely, we can laugh about it now in hindsight. In the early days of the pandemic, we would bring on healthcare professionals. So we would bring on doctors to talk to families that were expecting children to answer questions about going into labor in the middle of a pandemic and what to expect when they went to certain hospitals, et cetera. And so we had a Zoom room full of expectant parents, and someone hacked into our Zoom and got into the camera and shook their penis. Yeah. And I thought that folks were going to be really upset, right? Oh my goodness, a bunch of, again, expected parents, and people just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I mean, obviously we stepped up our security protocols for we, required people to pre-register for these sort of public town halls. But yeah, little white dude, shaking his tiny little penis in the Zoom camera with a Zoom room full of OBGYNs and expectant parents in the middle of a pandemic.
All you can do is laugh. I know, man. Oh, God. All right. If you were to run for president one day, what would your rally entrance song be?
Ooh. Honestly, I'm going to get so roasted, but there's a song, I'm Proud to Be an American, that gets me every time. It makes me so emotional.
Oh my gosh. I've heard it a million times at the Air Force Academy. They played it at every event and every graduation. I know every word of it.
Yes, me too.
It's got a good tune, though. It really does.
It's got a good tune. And again, I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm an immigrant, super patriotic and proud to be an American citizen. So that would be my song.
That's awesome. Well, and thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it so much here on the Suburban Women Problem Podcast.
Thank you. This was lovely.
Welcome back, Amanda. That interview with Insei was amazing. I love her.
She's amazing and so fun to talk to. Before we go, we like to leave you with what we call a toast to joy. So this week, my toast to joy is to parks and all the people that make these parks possible. I did my trail run yesterday. We did takeout and met some friends at a park. That is our favorite thing to do right now that the weather's nice. Go to the park, get some takeout, meet friends. So the parks and the parks in my neighborhood and all the park boards and everything are my new favorite people in my life right now. So to the parks and all the park people.
I love it. I actually went to the park the other day with my kids. It was super impromptu. And what happened was we went to Goodwill. And then when we went to Goodwill, my son bought a soccer ball. So then he's like, hey, let's go to the park and play with the soccer ball we just bought. And I had on like sandals, but I was like, it doesn't matter. So I was playing soccer with my kids in sandals, but it was hilarious and it was fun. I had a good time. So I'm with you on the parks. Definitely toast to that. My toast to joy is the teaching fellowship that I'm doing. And I know that y'all are probably like, what? Why are we toasting to going to school? But actually, I teach. I'm a lecturer. And I am normally the person standing in front of the room telling other people stuff. And so to be on the other side of that, number one, it's a humbling experience. I am definitely remembering, I'm getting flashbacks of college, but I am learning so much, y'all. I have had the opportunity to meet amazing people, and they are coming up with some really good ideas of ways I can really transform my class. And so I've been nerding out. Like, I'm really, really enjoying it. And so, my toast to joy this week is actually being a lifelong learner.
I'm glad you enjoy it. My husband just finished his second semester and I'm really ready. I'm really happy that he's done, but he loved it. I do not want to read another paper about Russia or China for the rest of forever. But he still has a dissertation to write, so I have a feeling I will. Well, this week, my toast to joy is my grandmother. She is almost 95, 94 and a half. She lives on her own in a small town in Oklahoma. And I'm thankful for the perspective she's given me over this past year and conversations with her. She's lived through some very exciting times, trying times in her life. A lot changed, but I'm thankful for that perspective that she can give me. And when she talks about people survived the Depression because they helped each other. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned coming out from, a very trying year in our country. So I hope that we remember that and all the things that we did for each other, and we continue to do them and think of others as much as we think of ourselves. We're all in this country together. We all have something to offer each other and help each other along.
Yeah, my grandmother was born in 1921. She passed away last year, just before her 99th birthday. But she was such a wealth of information and knowledge, and from the simplest things like how to make buttermilk biscuits to the bigger things like the things that she had to go through. She was a teacher. She actually taught in the school rooms, so the room where it's just everybody, all ages, just in a room. She was like that type of teacher. And so just like listening to her talk about that experience and stuff, I miss her dearly. But yes, can you imagine living through 90 something years of like the world changing?
Definitely. And she also was a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse.
Oh.
Her major was home ec because that was like the choice. She's grown too. She didn't grow up with anyone whose skin was a different color than hers. And she heard all the scary tactics, the things that have been used forever. But when her experience was different, when she met people and could connect with people on a personal level, it really changed how she felt. And, we just keep doing that. It worked for her when she was a teacher. It helped her meet different people and have different experiences in life. She changed her mind, a safe place to change your mind. She had new experiences that brought her new understanding. So when people talk, things change.
That's awesome. Thanks so much to everyone joining us. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating and a review so that other people can discover it too. We'll see you again next week on another episode of The Suburban Women Problem.
The Suburban Women Problem was created by Red Wine and Blue. Our executive producer is Beverly Batt. Our producer and editor is Amy Thorstensen, and our video producer is Ashley Hufford. If you're ready to be part of the Suburban Women Problem, head over to redwine.blue and sign up for our newsletter so you don't miss a thing.